Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fresh Start podcast. My name is Staci Wynn. It's good to be here with you today, and as usual, I'm joined by Marsha Ramirez. Marsha, hello.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. This new podcast has been a lot of fun so far, and a lot of people listen to our other podcast, God and My Girlfriends, and now we have literally have a fresh start here. We and for those of you who like God and My Girlfriends, we're not saying we'll never do another season there, but this has been fun. We've been kind of able to open it up to some new topics, and today's guest and topic is one that's really close to my heart because I love her because she's a friend. And so I just want to tell you a little bit before I introduce her. I want to tell you a little bit about her because she is pretty remarkable. Our guest today is Staci Frenes. She's a singer-songwriter, author, and gifted storyteller. She's a UC Berkeley graduate, a mom and a wife, and a former English teacher. Staci has built a career blending her love of words and music into something deeply personal and universally resonant. With 10 albums of music, multiple film and television placements, and countless performances at conferences and retreats and intimate venues, she has had really a beautiful career. Her journey as a writer and speaker started when she wrote her first book, which is called Flourish. It's still out there, where she explores how each of our unique gifts can find really meaningful expression. And her latest book, which we're going to talk a lot about today, Love Makes Room, is a memoir of her evolving understanding of faith and love and family as she embraces her daughter's LGBTQ plus identity within her Christian beliefs. Whether she's performing music, speaking, or writing books, Staci's work is characterized by authenticity, hope, and a profound ability to communicate faith in ways that are both relatable and inspiring. Staci and her husband Abe make their home in San Francisco Bay Area, and we are so happy to have her with us today. So welcome, Staci Frenes.
Thank you. Gosh, that was so thank you. I forgot all those things about myself. It's nice to be reminded by God and my girlfriends, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, hey, you're a badass. You are.
Thank you.
You've done a lot of stuff, and it's yeah, I think we all sometimes need a reminder of how far we've come and what we've done. And yeah,
Amen.
you've done a lot of things, all really cool things. But I was just telling Staci Wynn, we were laughing before we got started. I said, I don't know how I'm gonna talk. There's two Stacy's here. I said I could call them thing one and thing two, but that may not make it. But I was telling Staci Wynn beforehand about how when you and I first met, which was probably, was it maybe 4 or 5 years? It must have been, it must have been during COVID or something like
Or just
2020.
after COVID. Yeah, I was in Nashville visiting my sister, I think.
Right. And you came
Hmm.
over to my house and we actually recorded an episode of God and My Girlfriend's podcast, which is still one of the top listened to episodes of all 5 seasons.
Mm.
I think your story just resonates with people, and it's an important story. So, would you mind just kind of telling our listeners a little bit about your journey with that?
Yeah, I would. I'd love to talk about that because I feel like it's such a fitting story for this podcast, this idea of a fresh start.
Hmm.
If you think about it, when we look back on our lives, we all have these moments where you can define kind of this place where whatever happened before becomes the before, and then everything after becomes the after, these before and after moments, that define the trajectory of our lives. And
Yeah.
I think there's not really any one event in my life that I can point to that had as much impact on my faith um, as this one event did in my life, which was really a point at which my conservative Christian faith underwent a radical shift. As I experienced my teenage daughter, who was 16 at the time, in a car ride on the way to school, uh, telling me that she was gay, and this is in the context of a family that I grew up evangelical Christian, very conservative, pretty fundamentalist, believing that the Bible was uh, literally true. Everything in it was literally true. Married someone of the very same, cut from the same cloth from evangelical Christianity, and raised our kids. Was in ministry as a worship leader in churches all throughout the country. Really, I was a worship leader, and a musician and a songwriter and a conference speaker, and just kind of lived my life in the waters of evangelical churches. And that was my vocation. It was my calling. It was these were my people. And nowhere in that life did I imagine what it would be like for my daughter to come out as gay. And at the time, I remember pulling the car over on the way to school, and she was sobbing. She had had a recent breakup, and I had thought it was a breakup with the boy, and we ended up just kind of having this very delicate, fragile, fraught conversation where little by little, kind of the layers came undone, and she was able to finally tell me that she was gay. And you know, I just remember sitting in that car and knowing in my deepest soul two things. One is that this child was my daughter, and I was going to love her unconditionally, no matter what she had just told me. But secondly, from that moment on, I was in absolute terror about my faith, her faith, our lives, my future in the church, my vocation, our family life. I mean, everything. It seemed to upset the balance of everything in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I was afraid. I was afraid that God wouldn't be with us in this new future, in this after. I knew God was there before, and I could see my way through a future in the before times. But in the after she said that, what she said, it was like everything just kind of went dark and abysmal and scary. And it's difficult to explain unless you've really been very much within that framework of that belief system all your life.
Right.
And when you recognize just what it's not just it wasn't just kind of a hit to something that was like on the surface. It was a blow to the foundation,
Yeah.
And that's where I think that new start was. There was no other choice. I either had to redefine the way I understood my faith, or the nature of my relationship with my child was going to change. And that part I couldn't change. There was no way that part of the relationship was going to, or that part of the equation, I should say, was going to shift for me.
Right.
So I guess what that began was just months and months and then years of really moving from someone who was a good Christian girl since I was a kid, anchored in the certainty of my beliefs and my ultimate destiny, to this kind of spiritual seeker and explorer. And it became a faith that was much less rooted in certainty and more so rooted in the belief that there are questions we may never fully understand. And there are also, it just kind of blew apart my whole understanding of how I approach the Bible, how I approach other people. Yeah, I can say that it was one of the most defining moments of my life, for sure.
Right.
I love Oh yeah, I love how you describe that as like the choice to begin a journey and to explore, because we've talked, and one of the things that stands out to me about you and our conversations in the mastermind was your idea of needing new maps in life.
Yeah.
And it's kind of listening to your story over time, and and seeing how impactful it's been in just your worldview, like that stands out to me. I always think when I think of you, I think of the maps. We need new
Mm.
maps. It sounds like that's exactly what you did. You sought out a new map.
Yeah, and it was really by such necessity because the old maps weren't working. They weren't taking me where I needed to go. Where I needed to go was to a place of deeper understanding and love for my child. And where the old maps were taking me was to a detached disconnect from my child. And I began seeing that in so many areas of my life that these old maps I'd been following, if I'm good, I'll have a blessed life. That was one of my maps. If, the Bible has all the answers I need, that was a map I followed. Heaven is my reward for an obedient life. That was a map I followed.
Mm.
There were so many maps that we follow as people who come from this faith tradition, and we don't even realize it until something comes along and says, you know, you're not like that's not going to get you where you need to go anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely needed to make new maps. I needed to find maps that would take me to where I needed to get, which was to a place of authenticity and absolute, sometimes mystery, sometimes uncertainty, sometimes, um, yeah, but most importantly, I think to relationship with my daughter and relationship with other folks within the LGBTQ community whom I've met and spent time with, and which kind of again was the need for this new map because the old map was, well, that's them and this is us, it was the us and them, and there was this very clear understanding of where they belonged and where I belonged. And of course, there are no such divides. And so I do think new maps is a good metaphor for the way I've been trying to live since that necessitated, a need for new
Mm-hmm.
maps for sure.
Also, when I think about these maps and, it, if a map or a certain theological belief, which I would say is part of that map, doesn't produce good fruit,
Mhm.
to me, that's what started hitting me. It's like some of the things that I was being taught growing up that were, you know, quote unquote biblical, and it's a biblical belief, and this is how we needed to live our life. I was seeing bad fruit come out of it. Just like you were saying, like if if you didn't come up with a new map, what you were hitting was, we were taught gay people are bad. We're good, right? That's, you talk
Mhm.
about us and them. They're on people we need to avoid or whatever, because
Mhm.
they're bad. They're living in sin and all of this. And so, but what that was creating, you could see it. It was that theology was creating fractured families. That's not good
Mhm.
fruit. It was creating high suicide rates in young people. That's not good fruit. You know, I could go on, but you're like, okay, this is not how God wants us to live. Like, and so as you were, I'm sure that's what you were experiencing too. So how did you start? Did you just start by diving into, did you start talking to people? Did you dive into the Bible and start trying to research some of those, clobber verses? How did you begin the journey of changing your theology around this?
Well, it became pretty clear to me that I had to look outside of my circles because anyone, and when I say circle, I mean like denomination, and because the people who were writing within the evangelical framework, you know, which I hadn't really read outside of, were it was an echo chamber. They were all saying the same thing around this topic. And it wasn't until I began to do some exploring, and the first way I explored was just what are other people saying about these 7 verses? Because essentially it's a very small number of verses that they call the clobber verses that speak to homosexuality. And I began there, and I began with researching books, but I also, beyond theologians and academics, I also went into, science and just started looking at the actual facts around it, and societies and cultures, and looking at the ways in which, um, you know, these topics, this issue has been so much broader than my faith led me to believe. And and so yeah, at first it was just like research, 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 and then it became, finding people on the internet. Because I knew right away, obviously, that I needed to find new community and new friends who I could talk to about this. And so I needed to find other parents. I needed to find, other, like, theologians and people who were walking with God and knew the Bible, and because these were things that I still had great value in, and I wanted to walk alongside people and learn from them. So I definitely sought out new community online in a big way, and in books, and but then there was also something that began happening where I really began to understand and trust, as I prayed and as I journaled and as I read scripture for myself, I began to sense this inner compass that I hadn't really been aware of before, because I had been taught before that you don't really have one, or you shouldn't trust it.
Mm.
And as I began to just think about the nature of being a mother, and what I knew about my daughter, and what I trusted and knew to be true about her belovedness and her worth and her dignity, and I thought, how could those things be in opposition to how God sees her? Me, who am a absolutely, less than perfect parent. How could those things be true of me as a parent and not be true of God as the parent creator of my
Mm.
child?
Oh, I love that.
And I think that's where when I went inward and began to just search my own heart as a mother, is when I found the deepest grounding in that truth. And and then, looked to scripture and saw a God that absolutely was unconditionally crazy about his people, crazy about seeking and redeeming and loving, people. And I saw it in the New Testament, and of course, the Old Testament is got its own vibe around how God is pictured at times. But you can see the thread. I mean, if you read it, you can see the thread that God's love, God's continual wooing, of people comes back over and over and over. And of course, Jesus, illustrates that time and time again, that it was, it's the outsiders that he reached out to, and it was the religious folks who thought they knew the answers that he was most, critical of. And yeah, so it was really very much a journey, and it was really very much, it involved also just being with Abby, is my daughter's name, being with her and being with her friends, and just being around real people who claimed a different sexual identity than I did, and lived, um, but in every other way. And I know this sounds so silly to say, but in every other way, they were exactly like any other teenagers, exactly like any other kids that my daughter would have been hanging out with. And, I grew up with this stigma around what the homosexual agenda or the gay agenda or the gay community was like. And of course, it was nothing like that. And these were just kids. They were just people on the same kind of path as my daughter was. So it was both things. It was research, it was prayer, and then it was also just my lived experience of being a mom of this kid and being around her friends and realizing, wow, the things I was taught were so wrong about her and about everyone who, has ever claimed to be different than me in this area. Um, so it was absolutely, like I keep saying, it was just like this before and after, and I could never ever imagine going back to the before time now.
Mm.
So tell us more about when you considered coming on today and thinking about fresh starts. What what perspectives came to mind for you? How did this shape some fresh starts for you?
Well, I think that part of the fresh start for me involved really a paradigm shift in the way I think of faith, for one thing, a paradigm shift as in it's not rooted in certainty, it's rooted in mystery, it's
Mm.
rooted in beauty, it's rooted in curiosity. Um, it's almost like I felt like the fresh start for me was just, you know, the anchor. Like if I think about a ship, moving through a river, I had to pull up that anchor because I think the anchor was grounded in the wrong place and I
Mm.
couldn't get anywhere as long as that anchor was grounding me in that place. So this idea of curiosity over fear, and letting go of those fears was probably the biggest fresh start for me, but also new community. I mean, you two are a perfect example. I feel like we've met through circumstances that I would never have been in the path to meet Marcia, to meet you, if I hadn't have sought out new community in my life. And that's been huge. It's also been, as we know, part of making a fresh start is also letting go and grieving loss.
Hmm.
And so that has to be a part of our process is acknowledging what hurts and what's painfully having to be left behind, and the people who don't understand the fresh start and the people who don't want the fresh start because the old way feels familiar and comfortable. And you can't, it's like what Jesus said about wine and wineskin. You can't ever fit back into that wineskin again.
Hmm.
And those are times, sometimes that feels really sad to me. But I think there's an inevitability to fresh start, right? There's kind of like a forward motion to it. You just have to keep moving forward the way a
Hmm.
river moves forward. There's no
Hmm.
going back.
That's really good. Yeah, that's definitely once you're have that forward momentum. I can't say that, as I think about the situation in my own life, like I can't say that I never considered what it might be like to go back to how things were, but it's like an immediate catch. Like, no, no, no. There's a
Yeah.
depth. There's a depth of love that was unanticipated in this shift. And why would you want to go back to something that's less than? That depth, I think, brings mystery. Like I loved what you said, just the mystery of faith.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's so much more deep and complex when we just give way and let ourselves experience it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Um, Barbara Taylor Bradford, Barbara Brown Taylor, I mean, said that, we think of life as a train um, journey, like getting off on certain stops and this kind of very linear path. And she said, but in all actuality, it's a sailboat ride. And
Mm.
sometimes you just have to let the wind catch you and take you. And there are no, you may think you have destinations or stops along the way, but oftentimes that's not where you go. And I love that vision. I think that's such an apt metaphor for how life really does take us to um, you know, undreamed shores, I call them. We don't know where we're going. We don't often know where we're going, but it will be a good place. You'll have everything you need when you get there. Um, it'll be scary, but it will ultimately be good because I believe that God is in control and that He's leading us into good places.
Yeah, I think when we talk about, I mean, your specific situation when it when you realized I don't have any choice but to take a second look at this and as they call deconstruct, some people don't like that word, but I mean it's really perfect for what it is. You're taking a belief, maybe one specific belief, maybe an entire belief system or whatever, and you're it's like peeling back an onion, like the layers, like is the core healthy? You know, maybe that core is rotten and it's created, these layers that people are living in, but they don't realize that at the core of it, like I said, there's something rotten there that's not healthy and it's not. And I loved what you said too about you found your inner compass. And you also said something about lived experiences because those two things were things that, growing up for me and my religious background were not to be, it didn't matter what you felt. Like you said, your own inner feelings, your own, which, excuse me, it's the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit inside you. If you're connected to God and you're praying and you feel something moved inside of you, this is not right. No matter what your religious, teacher is trying to tell you. And they certainly don't want you to count on your own experience. You can't trust your own feelings and you can't trust your own experience. I mean, it's now it's just ridiculous to me.
It's that old wineskin. It's like you can't even imagine
Yes,
fitting back in there again.
you
Yeah,
can't. You can't.
right.
Even though, like you said, I mean, there were times where I was like, I missed that bubble. I felt safe in that bubble for a long time. Now, there's a lot of uh, uh, people that did not feel safe in that bubble. I felt safe to a degree. I didn't feel respected in the bubble. I didn't feel valued as a woman and my gifts in the bubble, but I still felt somewhat safe. I knew that someone would, if I was sick, that someone from the church would bring a casserole or take care of my child, or, I knew that there was this certain community that would make sure my needs were met because they did that. They did that well. But man, you start, expanding on any belief system that doesn't fit in their box, and suddenly you are out. And once I was
Yeah.
out, I couldn't go back in. I just couldn't.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, what would you want listeners to know about and what they can take away from your story? I mean, this has deeper impacts than even what we've talked about so far, to just how you navigate your career.
Yeah.
And it seems like the journey just continued to kind of add on. You continued to add on other aspects, other unexpected ways that this would impact your life.
Yeah, it really has. It's been impactful. And there are times when I wouldn't say I long to go backwards, but I would say there are times when the grief of it is still feels fresh for me.
Mm,
When when there's maybe a new direction that I want to go in, and I find that that's a severed path because
Mm,
of this topic of where I've landed, and other people haven't landed there with me. And so there's still grieving that I'm doing, and I'm still discovering what this fresh start means and where it's taking me. But I guess what I would want listeners to know is that it's the best fresh starts are kind of the ones that are a combination of, you feel like, in some ways you feel like they're being made for you because life has thrown something at you that you haven't expected. But but in that place you also recognize the agency that you do have,
mm,
and that you recognize that it may feel like all you can do is despair in that moment, or you know get sucked into the direction that it's moving you. But the truth is, you do have agency, and you do have the ability to stop and say, I can't change what's happening around me, but I can change the way I'm responding to it, and I can
mhm.
change the way I am, the steps I'm taking in this place. And I think that there's just incredible, empowering, beautiful homecoming to these fresh starts,
mm,
because we see a new part of ourselves. We come home to a new part of ourselves, I think, in a new
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
and we trust ourselves in more profound ways with each new fresh start. So I guess what I would say is just be brave.
Yeah.
It's hard, but be brave, because the payoff is always so much better than staying in the despair or in the scary part.
mm,
Yeah, because I don't think we really have touched on this particular we've talked about it so much, but we didn't talk about it today. The fact that your your career was severely impacted. I mean, your career, as you had made a living as a worship leader, you performed it at evangelical women's conferences. I mean, this was how you survived. This was your career, and you were suddenly uninvited. You were not in anymore, and
Right.
so you took a you took a hit there. I mean, a hard hit, and that must have felt like that must have you must have it must have really felt so personal and
Mm.
It,
something to grieve. Yeah.
yeah, no, it definitely, and that's where I'm saying there's still those moments of grieving it
Yeah.
and feeling that fresh pain. And at the same time, and it also took a lot of time for me to pivot and find another way to even literally make a living.
Hmm.
Um, but that is part of it, and that's part of why I say it's not without cost. You know, any fresh start is not without cost. But for sure, this one was debilitating financially. It was debilitating emotionally, in a lot of ways for me for a long time. Yeah, but
I know we really appreciate you sharing your story. And, I'm sure listeners are going to want to check into your work and into your book. So we have all of that in our podcast notes. But what are some ways that others can really get a good sense of what you're up to right now?
sure. Well, I'm fairly active on the socials. Tend to be on Instagram more than any others, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I have a website. And then also, my book, Love Makes Room, is probably the best way to really get a broad sense of this story. If there are other parents out there who just really want to hear a voice of someone who's walked through this, please get the book and know that you're not alone. Um, so yeah, that would be the best way, I think, for people to connect with me.
And I've got to ask, how are you holding up in the world as it stands right now, with all the changes and the attack on DEI and just the
Right.
threats that seem to be out there? How are you doing?
It's a, it's I ask me on any given day, and one day I might be just tearing my hair out and despairing, and another day I might just say it's going to be okay. But I think it's about I have to kind of take an inner posture of resistance and understanding that each of us has a voice and we have a unique way to use that voice in the world. And I have to say that for the next 4 years, I'm going to be looking for creative ways to voice my resistance because
Hmm.
what's happening is absolutely deplorable. And
Hmm.
it's talk about going backwards.
Hmm.
Um, we can't go there. We cannot go there. So yeah, I'm right now very trying to stay in a creative mode of like looking for creative ways to use my voice for good
Mm,
is kind of the mode I've been trying to stay in.
Yeah,
that's
we were just our episode last week was with VL Cox, and she's a artist, and we were just talking about that. Like, it's the time for creatives to get to
Yeah.
work and use what gifts we have as a form of resistance. And
And it's the only way to stay out of anxiety too, because
yes.
anxiety is it's a thief of all those good things that help us create
Hmm.
and keep our voices heard. So
Yeah.
stay creative.
Hmm. Well, before you get to your prompts, um, Stacy Wynn always has some good prompts here at the end of our podcast. But I want to say, I want to just reinforce about your book, Love Makes Room. I have read a lot of books on this subject, and I seriously think yours is the best. It just walks through. There's so much, there's a lot of books you can read on this subject that read almost like a textbook. It gives you a lot of information, but your brain starts hurting after a while. And yours is this beautiful, true experience memoir that pulls you in, and yet that information is still given to you in a real way. And so, yeah, I have to just say that. I just think your book is amazing And
Thank you so
and
much.
I encourage anyone out there to read it if they have a LGBTQ child or niece or nephew, or if they know anyone that, I mean, it just, or even if you don't, read it and learn how someone else's experience is impacting them. Because I think that's the only way that this country is going to get together, is like care about other people's experiences, whether
Yeah.
it's yours or not. Like, listen to somebody else's story and go, oh, this is a real person who lived this real journey, and it should be considered in what is happening in our country.
Amen. Good, good, good.
Hmm.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I mean, I mean it. It's for sure. So, all right, Staci, what's our Enneagram prompts today?
Ready for some Enneagram prompts?
Yeah.
All right. So
I'm
we're
all about
talking
it.
we're talking about exploring new perspectives. So from a thinking standpoint, that intellectual exploration, which is a word that you use, so my ears perked up. We're exploring. What core beliefs, religious or otherwise, have you held on to without truly questioning why you believe them? And what new information or experiences might challenge your beliefs? And are you willing to look into those challenges?
Good questions.
And feeling is the emotional connection. So, how would you describe the feeling of letting go of the safety and comfort of old beliefs? What fears or anxieties surface when considering a different perspective? And what does it feel like when your beliefs are challenged? And doing. So this is action and application. What's one small step you can take this week to actively explore a new perspective on a belief that you currently hold? And where can you go to find some of that information? Could you have a respectful conversation with someone who holds differing views? Or read a book? Or listen to a podcast episode about an alternative viewpoint? So
Those are
listeners,
great.
Good. Those are really good.
Yeah.
we all need all three.
Yeah.
One might seem easier to do than others, but we need all three.
And just a reminder that we always put Staci's questions in our show notes. So if you're sitting here listening, if you're driving and listening and it's like, "Ooh, what were those questions again?" Go to our show notes and you can find them there, and maybe they can help you as you process some things that you heard today. So, good job, Staci.
I love those. Those are so good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, Staci Frenes, thank you so much for offering to share your story with us again. Like I said, there isn't, I think it was season 1 or 2. I should have looked that up, that where I talked to you in length about your story. So thanks for coming on again today, because I think we have some new audience members, and it is a perfect example of a fresh start. And I'm so glad that we're included in your fresh start.
I know.
Yay.
Yeah.
And look, we
Absolutely.
made it through without having any difficulties having two Stacys on the same.
That's right.
know.
That's
We
right.
made it.
We did it.
It wasn't so bad. Wasn't so bad. All
Nope.
right, ladies. Well, I love you, and I'm so grateful for both of you. And thank you to the listeners out there. And y'all, I'm trying to get some social media going for y'all to connect with us. But you could always go to our website and find us there, and get more information on guests and other things there. We're slowly putting it together, so bear with us. But
And that's the freshstartpodcast.com.
yeah. Oh, good. Thank you. And that'll be in show notes. And you can always email us at freshstartpod2025@gmail.com too. That's a good way to contact us as well. If you want to be a guest, or if you know someone that would be a good guest, or if you just want to tell us how great we are. That's a good place.
And you two are so great. So great.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you in a couple of weeks here on the Fresh Start Podcast.